Harry panicked, and not quietly, not privately, but in a way that sent shockwaves through every corner of the institution he once claimed to protect. Because this was never just about security, never just about a visit, never just about reconciliation. This was about control collapsing in real time.
This is now triggering genuine concerns for this man's sanity. I think he's losing it.
If I was Invictus, I would just think, enough. You know, when are we going to focus on what you're actually coming for? And what's going to be interesting is, and mark my words on this, is this now a private visit? Who's funding this visit? Because if they're being funded via that particular charity, one might suggest they're not getting their money's worth.
Prince Harry's total breakdown and break from reality has continued overnight, because not only is he breaking down in tears again during his holiday to Portugal, he has now leaked a private security document to Chris Shipp of Woke ITV, which has been broadcast to the world. And the nutty thing about this is he is literally saying, I'm a terrorist target. Come and attack me. Come and attack my children.
She has such a bad reputation, and she needs that proximity to the royal family so that she can continue to play Meghan, Duchess of Sussex.
I've got a message for Harry and Meghan. No one in Britain gives a rat's backside whether you come or not. You guys are over.
The countdown had already begun, but nobody realized what it was really counting down to. On the surface, it looked almost emotional. A father waiting, a king hoping, a family that might finally come back together after years of distance, silence, and carefully managed public statements. But underneath that soft narrative, something far more unstable was building. Because when hope turns into hesitation, and hesitation turns into conditions, and conditions turn into ultimatums, that's not reconciliation. That's negotiation. And negotiations inside royal families are never about feelings, they're about power. What changed? Why did a simple visit suddenly become so complicated that it started unraveling everything around it?
Being all very excited by that. Then suddenly, last Friday into Saturday, they start saying, Harry says, oh, well, I've just found out I might, well, effectively said, I've just found out I'm not going to get armed police protection. That armed police protection I've been fighting in the courts to get for the last 2-3 years. In that case, I'm not going to bring the kids back, and I'm not bringing Meghan back. King, heartbroken, bewildered, distraught.
That moment in Scotland wasn't just ceremonial, it was symbolic. The Order of the Thistle, the quiet dinner, the timing Princess Diana's birthday, none of it was accidental. And yet, the absence, that was louder than anything said at the table. Because absence in this family always means something. Always, why wasn't he there? Why wasn't the one person who should have stood beside William on that day present? People will say logistics, security, scheduling, but none of those explanations survive the weight of that date. Diana's birthday isn't just a date, it's a memory, it's a connection, it's a responsibility. And when that responsibility is ignored, people start asking questions that don't go away.
Remember, that is what Diana always wanted. You know, she always wanted the spare to be there in support of the heir. Yet he's turning it all into a nightmare and what could have actually been a very lovely celebratory dinner.
And suddenly the pattern starts forming. Not coincidence, not misunderstanding. Choice. Every single time a choice. William standing alone. The king watching quietly. The distance growing wider but never acknowledged directly. Because that's how this works: silence instead of confrontation. Distance instead of explosion. But silence, when repeated enough times, stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like strategy. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the stress isn't just emotional anymore. It's physical. The king's health, the pressure, the constant public conflict, it's no longer contained. It's leaking into everything. And yet, the demands don't stop. They escalate.
What we have with Meghan and Harry is this endless battle of self-pity and victimhood and, oh, it's not going well and all of this sort of stuff, you know. And now, Harry, as we know, is still battling on, creating headlines.
This is where the narrative fractures completely. Because now it's not about family, it's about image. Victimhood, headlines, control over perception. And right at the center of it is this demand that refuses to go away: security. Not just any security. Armed protection. Elite status. The kind reserved for the absolute core of the monarchy. And that's where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore.
The reason he's been turned down is because Ravik has intel that tells them that he's safe. There's no way that if they had any intelligence that stressed that he was in jeopardy or his wife or children were in jeopardy, there's no way they wouldn't provide that security. It's Harry's ego wanting what his brother has.
Multiple reviews, multiple rejections, experts saying no again and again. But instead of acceptance, there's escalation. Reports commissioned, claims amplified, urgency manufactured, and it almost works until you start comparing behavior to narrative. Because fear leaves patterns. Real fear changes movement, decisions, exposure, and here the behavior doesn't match the claim.
He shelled out yet more money on a 40-page risk assessment by a security organisation that he's paid for. And he's now presented this to the government, and it says that the Duke of Sussex, when he comes to host the Invictus Games, could be a serious terrorist target.
Because logic starts breaking apart the moment you look too closely. If the threat is real, why travel freely elsewhere? If the danger is urgent, why appear publicly without the very protection being demanded? Why Portugal? Why Ukraine? Why crowded events? Why visible appearances with no fear, no hesitation, no adjustment? And suddenly, what was presented as protection starts looking like leverage.
That is what Meghan is concerned about, because she had absolutely no problem, P. Dinah, traveling to Chicago on her own, going to Colombia, going to Nigeria. I think Meghan knows there's absolutely no genuine threat here, but she doesn't want to be embarrassed, so it's much better playing into Harry's paranoia. And this is something that we've seen throughout their relationship, you know?
Which is it? Is the threat real or isn't it?
Well, why does Taylor Swift get this armed security? Well, because she had to cancel a bunch of shows prior to her London show because there were legitimate threats, because there was a terror attack on an Ariana Grande concert in the United Kingdom. The two don't compare. Taylor Swift is bringing in millions of dollars to the economy. Prince Harry is there for a PR boost.
And this is where it becomes deeply uncomfortable, because the children enter the equation, not quietly, not incidentally, but strategically. If the threat was real, they wouldn't be anywhere near it. That's not speculation, that's instinct, basic instinct. So why introduce them into a situation that's being described as dangerous? Why attach them to the demand? Unless the demand needs weight, unless the narrative needs emotional reinforcement, unless this isn't about safety, but about pressure.
If it was my loved ones, I wouldn't care if there was a team of 50 MI5 and MI6 agents continually surrounding my family. I wouldn't care. If they had the Army, Navy, and Air Force escorting us places, a threat is a threat. I would not risk anything happening to those I love. There is no guarantee that the security team will be able to save your life in an attack. So he either believes that he is in terrible danger or he doesn't.
And then comes the moment that breaks everything open. Chelsea, a doorbell camera, no security, no protection, just a man walking casually, knocking on doors, looking for connection, no fear, no urgency, no visible threat. And suddenly the entire argument starts collapsing under its own contradictions, because you can't be in danger only when it's convenient. You can't demand protection in one moment and move freely in the next. People notice that. They always do. And here's the detail nobody wants to say out loud. This might not even be his strategy, because every shift, every reversal, every sudden change in plan, it all points somewhere else. Somewhere quieter, but far more influential, because the visit was supposed to happen. The reunion was supposed to happen. The children were supposed to be there. And then everything changed fast, too fast. What happened between those few days? Who changed the narrative? Who benefits from the visit not happening unless every condition is controlled? Because when you step back and look at it, really look at it, this stops being about security entirely. It becomes about control. Control of movement, control of image, control of narrative. And the most dangerous part, the person at the center of it might not even realize he's no longer in control of it himself. And just when it feels like the story has reached its breaking point, it shifts again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that feels even more dangerous, quiet collapse behind the scenes. Because while the public is distracted by security demands and family tension, something far bigger is slipping out of control, the institution tied to his name, the one that was supposed to define his legacy. Invictus, at first, the cracks were subtle. Missed responses, delayed communication, small signs that something wasn't being handled the way it used to be. But then the stories started stacking up. Veterans reaching out and hearing nothing back. Organizers quietly expressing concern. Partners beginning to hesitate. And suddenly, what once looked like a symbol of purpose started looking like something else entirely. Something overwhelmed, something neglected, something overshadowed by personal chaos that refused to stay contained. And then the number starts echoing $55 million. Not just a figure, a weight, a responsibility, a promise, because that kind of funding isn't abstract. It translates into therapy programs, rehabilitation, support systems, real lives being changed. And when people start asking where that focus has gone, when they start noticing that attention is being pulled away from those who need it most, the questions become sharper, louder, harder to ignore. Why does it feel like the mission is being replaced by image management? Why does it feel like the spotlight has shifted away from veterans and onto one man's ongoing narrative? And this is where the pressure turns inward. Governments begin pulling back. Commitments shrink. Support becomes conditional, not because the cause isn't important, but because trust is starting to fracture. Canada asking questions. Australia stepping away. Public voices growing louder, not coordinated, not organized, but unified in frustration. And when independent voices start aligning like that, it signals something deeper than criticism. It signals a shift in perception that's already too far gone to quietly fix. Inside the boardroom, the conversation no one wanted to have is now unavoidable because institutions survive on stability, not headlines. They depend on consistency, not controversy. And when one individual begins to dominate every narrative connected to that institution, the risk becomes impossible to justify. Do they protect the founder or protect the foundation? That's not a symbolic choice. That's survival. And while all of this is unfolding, something else is happening at the exact same time, almost like a mirror image. On one side, increasing tension, escalating demands, growing instability. On the other, silence. Calm, presence, Catherine appearing in public without spectacle. William moving through everyday spaces without drama. No excessive security, no emotional declarations, no constant headlines, just visibility, just consistency, just work. And that contrast, it doesn't need explanation. It speaks for itself because people aren't just watching actions anymore. They're comparing them, measuring them, deciding what feels real and what feels constructed. And when one side looks effortless while the other looks forced, the conclusion starts forming without anyone needing to say it out loud. But the timing is what turns this from tension into collision, because the legal case isn't happening in isolation. It's landing right in the middle of everything. A verdict that's been building for years, now scheduled to arrive at the worst possible moment, during the visit, during the pressure, during the uncertainty. And if that outcome isn't favorable, if it lands publicly, visibly, with no room to control the narrative, then everything changes again, instantly, because then it's not just about family, not just about Invictus, not just about perception. It becomes about credibility, about whether the narrative that's been carefully maintained can survive direct contradiction in real time. And that kind of moment, you can't prepare for it. You can't spin it fast enough. You can only react. So now the board is watching, the public is watching, the family is watching, waiting, because the decision that's coming isn't just about one role or one position. It's about whether an institution can separate itself from the person who once defined it, whether it can say enough even if that decision reshapes everything. And here's the part that lingers, the part that refuses to settle. What if this isn't the peak of the story? What if this is just the moment before everything finally breaks into the open? Because the signs are all there. The contradictions, the pressure, the silence where there should be clarity, the sudden shifts that don't quite make sense until you connect them. The question isn't whether something is happening anymore. That part is obvious. The real question is how much of it has already happened, quietly behind closed doors, while everyone was focused on the noise. And by the time the answer becomes public, it might already be too late to change it.